Is it true design is subjective? Obviously not. We'll tell you why this week on Motoring 2007.
TSN's Motoring 2007 is brought to you by Q from Quaker State. Unleash all your horses. And Michelin, a better way forward.
You know, a lot has been written about the woes facing companies like General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. And lots of reasons have been offered up as to why. But you know, the real reason is back when they stopped building cars that you and I wanted. They stopped listening. And of course, things are changing. Let's not forget, we selected the Saturn Aura as our car of the year. But fast forward to a company like Toyota. Here's a company that when it comes to quality, prides itself in building vehicles that are bulletproof. But recently, they've had some quality glitches. Toyota's response, retrain the entire North American workforce. This despite the fact that Toyota overtook General Motors as the number one car seller in the world. Now, how about Subaru? This is a company that all but introduced all-wheel drive to the masses back in the early 70s. A few years ago, they tried something different, built a crossover called the B9 Tribeca. Good vehicle, but a lot of people felt they went too far, too edgy in the design. Subaru's response, back to the drawing board, and this week we're going to check out the newly designed and brand new 2008 Tribeca and find out if those changes were for the better.
When I saw the first Tribeca, I loved the interior. I still love the interior. They've won awards for it. It deserves all the praise that it gets. They also at the same time took a giant leap design-wise with the outside. And I think their idea was to try and break this stodgy image that a lot of people accuse Subaru of having. In addition to which, they came up with a very, very sort of dynamic and quirky, if you will, front end, which they were hoping would catch on, which then they could kind of use with the rest of the line to become a signature. That didn't work.
As it turns out, over the past 2 years, Subaru has decided to retreat on the rather controversial front-end styling of the Tribeca and made it more conventional.
When I did a market research, there are some area that pointed out by the customers. Mainly, the first one is exterior designing, styling. It's very polarized opinions. Some people love it, some people hate it. So that is one of the challenge. And the other point is a little power and torque. And all those are now addressed with the new 08 model year.
They have upped the displacement on the engine without picking up any weight, which is kind of nice. So now we're at 3.6 liters, 275 horsepower, more than enough to move this vehicle along, gets it uphill, gets it downhill. It does everything that you want it to do. They're backing off the conventional SUV moniker, so you don't expect this vehicle to go off-road. You don't need a lot of that bottom end torque. You don't need a 2-speed transfer case because this really is a urban SUV, if you will, or even a CUV.
Tribeca is really a progressive sport utility vehicle. What we see is really it is a sport utility vehicle in capabilities, 213 millimeters of ground clearance, which is comparable, if not better, than most sport utility vehicles out in the marketplace. However, from a design point of view, it looks more like one of the new age crossover utility vehicles. And from that standpoint, its key competitors would be vehicles like the Nissan Murano, Acura MDX.
On a scale of 10, I'd say it's probably between a 7 and 8. The new 3.6 liter flat 6 is a huge improvement over the old 3 liter. And where its basic improvements is in its mid-range torque. You don't need to put your foot down to get it to kick down or to be able to accelerate not briskly but comfortably sort of around somebody or back up to road speed after you've slowed down to go around a pothole or something.
The Subaru build is really quite different than many other manufacturers. It really feels very solid, and you get that in Subarus. Very well engineered, very tight to drive, very rugged feeling vehicle, but refined as well. This is what the Tribeca also has.
So, 2 years later, here we are. They've looked at their sales, didn't pan out. Now they've backed off. What they've given us now is much milder, if you will. It'll probably play. On the other hand, it's not dynamic in any shape, way, or form. So they're still not quite there.
I thought it was a great vehicle before, and we did pretty well with the sales, but I think there's a greater opportunity for an all-wheel drive vehicle coming from Subaru in this size.
I really think Subaru's on a roll. They're pretty much doing a complete makeover. Their sales are increasing. Their dealer body is really pumped. I think their sales are going to go up this year.
Tribeca is originally has a very strong product, but there are some weak points. We admit that, and we addressed and we changed it. So now the new Tribeca is a very, very good product. I strongly believe that.
You know how you spell Canada, don't you? C-A-N-A-D-A. More later on Kenzie's Corner. A.
If you drive 160,000 kilometers, this vehicle will save you 6,306 litres of fuel. This week on Test Drive, the Ford Escape Hybrid. The debate over whether a hybrid should stand out from its sibling has been raging since the Honda Insight and original Toyota Prius debuted. Some want their green wheels to slip by unnoticed, others want to make a statement about their chosen mode of transportation. Today the trend seems to side with the first group. The Ford Escape Hybrid certainly hides its differences. Aside from its small hybrid badges, it's all rather anonymous. As with the exterior, the differences between the Escape and the Hybrid are very, very subtle. Inside, there's a spot on the tachometer that tells you when the engine has gone into its idle stop mode, and there's a second dial up here. It tells you if the electric motor is charging the battery or assisting the drive. The rest of it, well, it's all Escape and it can be loaded up. One of the features I really do like is the nav system. This thing is intuitive and the touch screen makes it very easy to program. The Hybrid's gasoline side is based on Ford's 2.3-litre Duratec 4, but operates on the Atkinson cycle. This delays the closing of the intake valve, which lowers the effective compression ratio. This characteristic does drop the power, down 20 horsepower to 133 and down 28 pound-feet of torque to 124 when compared to the ordinary Escape. However, it ups the fuel economy by between 7 and 10%. Thankfully, the electric side more than compensates for the losses as it brings a 94 horsepower motor that's powered by a 330 volt battery pack. The net horsepower when both the gas and electric sides are on side is 155 horsepower. The electric motor's torque, however, a full 155 pound-feet at 3000 RPM, makes this feel substantially stronger. It will run to 100 kilometers an hour in 9 seconds, which is considerably better than the base Escape and within hailing distance of the V6 version. When it comes to compromises to the utility, there are virtually none, and it boils down to intelligent packaging. The main 330 volt battery, it sits right here under the cargo floor. That means you lose only about 1.4 cubic feet of cargo space and nothing in terms of versatility. The other thing, if you decide to buy an Escape, make sure you go for the reverse sensing system. Why is that important? Because of the 3 headrests on the rear seat. It makes it difficult to judge how close you are to something behind. The beauty of the Escape Hybrid is that it can run on gasoline, electricity or both, which is more than Honda's hybrids can do. Ford has done a good job of masking the transition between the electric and gas modes. As the switch occurs so quickly, it passes by all but unnoticed. The sensation actually feels like a single misfire, which is really no big deal. Tread lightly on the accelerator pedal and the hybrid pulls away quietly. And when you drive as though there's an egg between your boot and the gas pedal, it's possible to get the hybrid up to 40 kilometers an hour without gasoline intervention. The one thing I don't like about this Ford Escape is the way the brake pedal feels. And it boils down to what happens when you hit the brakes. If you push them gently, you get the regen side kick in. Now it captures what would otherwise be waste energy and uses that to recharge the main battery. If you push a little harder, then the four-wheel disc brakes begin to work. The problem is the transition from one to the other is very abrupt, which makes it difficult to be smooth when you're stopping. As for handling, the hybrid feels remarkably like the regular thing. This means minimal body roll and understeer only surfaces when liberties are taken. More surprising is the effect the additional mass makes. About 130 kilograms when you throw in the battery electric motor and sundry electrical controls. The hybrid does not feel outwardly heavier than its gas-only sibling, which keeps the usual ponderous feel hidden in the background. The biggest flaw is the lack of any sort of electronic stability control system on the hybrid. A double whammy considering Ford's sophisticated advanced track is standard on all other versions. Aside from the brake pedal feel and the fact you can't get any sort of stability control system with the hybrid, there are no compromises, just upsides. If you compare it to the base four-cylinder model, it's got the same sort of utility, it handles just as well, but it comes with much better performance, and over the course of a year, it'll save you between $500 and $700 in fuel costs, and that is a significant advantage.
Time to update our long-term Suzuki XL7. We've had this vehicle for 6 months and about 12,000 kilometers, and we're really not looking forward to returning it. Suzuki completely overhauled its flagship SUV, making it bigger, more powerful, and without a doubt, better looking. The XL7 uses an extended version of the Chevrolet Equinox platform. Comes with four-wheel independent suspension, and the 7-seater gets load leveling shocks. I'm also really impressed with a nicely finished interior. The 3.6-liter V6 with 252 horses cannot be termed thrilling, but it makes for a quiet cruiser on the highway. One pet peeve is the wide turning radius and some poorly situated audio speakers. More on that on a future update.
Executive Director of Design for the Americas, Peter Horbury.
This is a Lincoln MKR Concept, which is here really to establish the whole DNA for the future of Lincoln. This is the look that we're progressing through a number of products which we're already working on for the future. But we thought we'd bring a car to the show which really displayed it all in one. Maybe some of the design cues won't necessarily be all on one car because we don't want the cookie cutter designs, but we do want to make sure that there are enough design cues that are established with Lincoln so that all the future Lincolns have a family identity without looking identical. It's got a beautiful cleanliness to it, a sort of sophisticated elegance, which, albeit still in a sporty profile, the four-door coupe, has that gracefulness that I think Lincolns really should have and used to have. Let's face it, the famous Lincolns of the 40s, 50s, 60s had
quite a different approach compared with other American luxury brands. They were much simpler, much more pure and cleaner designs, and I think they reflected the market itself, where an alternative luxury American car could be a little more brash and showy. The Lincoln customer always was a little more confident, a little more discreet, and this is a sort of car which it has the sportiness and the toughness of the profile, but it has all those elegant features from the past. There's much younger buyers coming into the Lincoln showroom to check us out, and of course this type of car will be, I think, for all ages.
You're looking at the brand new Subaru Outback, and when this vehicle was first introduced back in 1995, sport utilities were hot. Subaru didn't have one, so they built the Outback as the world's first sport utility wagon. And we'll take a much closer look at that Outback and a brand new legacy on a future program. But now let's head to the Quaker State Garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, you know how things tend to happen in threes? Well, I guess in the past 10 days I've had 3 customers' vehicles with a failed fuel pump. So it's certainly an issue that we need to talk about, because many of our viewers, I'm sure, have run into this situation and found how costly it can be. This particular tank, and the fuel pump, by the way, is inside the tank, is out of a Pontiac Grand Prix. And you can see how rusty the tank is. It's an older car, and in fact the tank has some pinholes in it. That's why I couldn't finish the job, and why it's in the back of the pickup truck waiting for a new tank that'll be in tomorrow. Now, there's the top of our tank sending unit right there. Suspended at the bottom of this tank unit, right down on the floor of the tank, is the electric fuel pump. There's the harness going to it. There's the outlet line going up with fuel pressure through the fuel filter and up to the injectors on the engine. The fuel filter threads on right here. This return line takes excess or unused fuel back to the tank in a cooling loop, and this third line is a vapor line. Now, I've already chased the cam ring or lock ring out of this tank so that it'll come out fairly easily, and we've just got to be careful to wriggle it out gently so that we don't damage or bend anything, and lift the tank unit up. I've got to reach down in here and pull the strainer past the edge of the tank so that it'll come out, and then be careful not to bend the float arm. Now we're going to be able to see the fuel pump. This entire unit is referred to as the sending unit, and right here is the electric fuel pump. This is the part that failed and caused the car to die, and it's available on this particular car as a separate entity, so we're going to replace this. Now, this pump was about $200, but some of them are quite a bit more than that. This part here is called the strainer, and this pre-filters any gas going into the pump so that a little piece of debris doesn't jam the vanes of the pump and stop the pump. There's the sending unit, the float arm that drives the gauge on the dash. You can see the wiring going to the fuel pump right there, and the wiring going to the sending unit. This is the outlet line going with high pressure fuel up to the engine, and the return line bringing excess fuel back into the tank. You can see these lines extended down here. This is the outlet line with high pressure fuel, and it's going to thread onto a fuel filter just like this one underneath the floor of the car. This is a service item you need to replace periodically. This is the return line and the vapor line. And over here, we've got the wiring harness that plugs into the floor of the car for the electric pump and the gauge unit. Now, on a newer car, and the third vehicle that I had to change the fuel pump on was a 2002, and it had what we call a pump module, which is this entire assembly that you see here. The sending unit, the gauge unit, the pump, the strainer, everything as one complete unit, nothing available as a separate part, but $850 for the part. You factor in the towing for when the vehicle died, all the labor involved, rusted fasteners and other parts, you're talking about a pretty big repair bill. This particular car needed a new gas tank as well, so by the time the smoke clears, you've got a pretty big repair bill when you talk about a fuel pump failure. Don't be surprised when you hear that the fuel pump's gone in your car. You're getting a pretty stiff bill for fixing it. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2007.
Well, the latest J.D. Power quality numbers are in, and guess what? Canadian car factories are right at the top. Nothing new, because they usually are. Now, the General Motors facility in Oshawa, well, the Chevrolet Impalas and Monte Carlos, the Buick LaCrosse and Allure, and those great new Chevy and GMC Sierra pickups, well, they're among the best built vehicles anywhere in the world. Now, the other survey that's well respected within the industry is the Harbor Report. Now this measures productivity based on the number of employee hours it takes to build a single vehicle. Well, guess what? The GM factory is also right at the top of that particular survey, which disproves the adage that you got to sacrifice quality to get profitability. You know, it's not just General Motors either. The Fords coming out of Oakville and St. Thomas, the Chryslers coming out of Bramalea, the Toyotas coming out of Cambridge, the Hondas out of Alliston, and the Ingersoll plant for GMC and Suzuki, they're also building very good quality cars. In fact, in the early days, the Civics coming out of Alliston were the best anywhere in the world, including Japan, and that's by Honda's own measurement. Now, Canada used to have a big advantage, and that was when our dollar was worth 64 cents US. Now, 80 to 90% of our production is sold in the States, so if you're making them at 64 cents and selling them at 100 cents, you got some wiggle room. You got a problem? You throw a little money at it, and it goes away. Well, nowadays, the Canadian dollar is almost at par, and yet our guys are still doing a great job. You know why? Because we're working harder. We also still have the advantage, of course, that national health care and pension plans means we have a cost advantage over our American friends, which, well, they're still working in the 19th century on that particular score. Now, if I may be permitted a bit of a segue, the Anaheim Ducks won the Stanley Cup recently, and may be based in California, but you know, they really were Canada's team because they had more Canadians on that team than anybody else. The reason they won? They worked harder, they worked faster, they were better coached, they were better managed, and they were more Canadian. Now, at the risk of sounding like Don Cherry, that sounds like the recipe for a great hockey team, but it also appears to be the recipe for a great car factory. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Few final thoughts on the 2008 Subaru Tribeca. As I mentioned earlier, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because who would have thought a conservative company like Subaru would have been criticized for going too far in the exterior design of the original B9 Tribeca. Well, to their credit, they went back and changed it, even though I had no problem with the original. The new one, it certainly looks like part of the Subaru family, which is good. The extra horsepower is good. As for that third seat, to give them the bragging rights of their first 7-seat vehicle, well, personally, I've never liked them unless you're going to use them all the time, because you got to choose between the people or the luggage. So you'll have to make that decision as to whether you want to spend the extra money. That's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
The car culture is really forever, so the wheels keep rolling and rolling, and I've had such a great experience from when I first started cars, pioneering way back in the 40s, where we first had to chop tops and channel cars and make them look a little different. Well, I'm like George Burns. I'm 39 years old, but I've been doing cars for 60 years.
TSN's Motoring 2007 has been brought to you by Q from Quaker State, Unleash All Your Horses, and Michelin, a better way forward.